those deeper ways. And so some of the challenges that we've seen in the course of just our infancy, this administration, in the work that you all have been doing for generations to allow self-determination, to create purposefully self-determination that leads to self-governance over the course of generation, is not only validating in many respects what you all have been telling us all along, but to begin to respond to that work accordingly. And here's what we've heard from you all, because I think it's valuable for us to take heed what those voices are that have been channeled from around the country. One of them has been the fragmentation of our systems of education. Any given reservation, 4 systems, maybe 5, if you have the accessibility of charters. The value and the necessity of taking this advocacy that we've gotten ourselves to, the hard work of building self-determination, usually in most instances on the backs of educators like yourselves, necessitating tribal leaders to be a part of that conversation in a responsible way is what's going to change that equation. And we've put a lot of work into this. As I shared with our National Indian Education Association and our National Congress of American Indians and many of the other stakeholder groups that came to town, the State Tribal Education Partnership grants, of which Oklahoma is not only benefit of, but we have other tribes around the country. Unfortunately, too few resources to serve all tribes, was but a figment of our imagination now 6 years ago. You have folks like Quentin Romanos, Jacob Sotai, all stalwart advocates of such a model. You got Gloria, I don't know if Gloria's here with us today. I remember them not beating me with this, but saying this is the game changer. This is what's going to disrupt the advocacy, the challenges, as well as leverage the opportunities. And on the Hill, it might as well have been crazy talk. All the paternalistic voices of, our tribes don't want that, or our villages don't want that, whatever the lens was, it wasn't something that was feasible. Fast forward to 2016 here, we have tribe upon tribe, we have school district upon school district, and state educational agency upon state educational agency, working directly with tribes to effect specific concrete initiatives that only time will tell if we get to those kinds of outcomes that we know that we need to be able to have to demonstrate our progress in that area. And under such tough circumstances, from the financial crisis of 2008 that was inherited under this administration, and how certainly I'm biased, but our president and other leaders around the country have navigated us through. We've not only protected resources in that sense, but also worked to advance them in these small ways in the big picture, but yet move the needle of that responsibility that at least our administration shares in responding to those circumstances. This organization among states and tribes has infused not just the State Tribal Education Partnership grants, but many of the grant structures where we know we have to make inroads or have them connected to one another. The siloing in Washington, D.C. is just as formidable as it is in your own communities of working across local municipalities and tribal governments or departments or whatever those barriers may be for yourselves. Whether we're talking about the Bureau of Indian Education, the Health and Human Services, Department of Agriculture, we have put a tremendous amount of work in coordinating and collaborating in more effective ways with those agencies. Through the White House Council on Native American Affairs and the White House Initiative's role in education, particularly to those efforts, we've seen one of the more substantive reforms on the Bureau of Indian Education, and what I think history will tell is going to be significant. Certainly more work can be done, but the kind of clarity, the kind of resourcing that is happening now in the wake of not only the study on this, which was heavily consulted on, but as well as the blueprint, which also was consulted on, is now going into implementation stages. Difficult to disrupt a long-standing institution such as the Bureau of Indian Education. Difficult to sever it from its subsidiaries in the meaningful ways that we know we have to ensure that education leaders and teachers and policy actors on behalf of tribes, in coordination with tribes, can do their job accordingly and not be backseated, not be neglected, not be an afterthought, but be the backbone of nation building as we know and that we need and that we know is important to those students outside of the Bureau of Indian Education, where the masses of students attend schools. And it's here in this area that in this last year, just a little shy of, I think, about 310 days here, if I'm not mistaken. But who's counting? All I know is my lifespan is running out, seemingly. So, the pedal to the metal, and I couldn't be more excited about this stage of where we're at. Because with the positions of leadership, just in the positions alone, whether you disagree with us as actors, Dr. Russell, Dr. Silverthorne, and myself are some of the longest serving individuals in their capacity in history. Think of that. And under these leaderships, not in isolation of ourselves, we have got done a tremendous amount of work. And what that says is that our strategies to ensure that individuals such as ourselves are not only supported, but held accountable in these roles. It couldn't be more stressful to me to think about who, not my choice, but this is Indian country's problem. And in that sense, I have equity. Who I hand this off to is going to be essential. The proverbial reins, the baton, the torch. I've worked hard and sense of responsibility, not in credit, to ensure that young people had access to this initiative since day one, in an effort to build up that next pathway of leadership. Maybe it comes from Oklahoma. Maybe it comes from Montana. Maybe Washington. I'd be excited if it was Alaska. But either way, they're going to have to serve all 567 tribes and think in terms of 300 different languages and over 1,700 school districts across the country and 32 urban native centers. A charge that I always tease the secretaries about dwindles their 50-state unit of analysis. And so important to this effort is the day in, day out of what our students deal with. Equipping resources to communities in a way that they not only have the flexibility to apply these to those diverse contexts, but also have the adequate funding and authority to implement against those resources as well. In the new ESSA, in the coming months, much of this will be haggled out, the new details of which you pointed to for the past 8 years of this administration as the barriers or the constraints, burdensome or inhibiting whatever frame of reference. And so it's going to be important that working through individuals, we just named a couple of them yesterday on the negotiated rulemaking for standards and assessments, Aaron Payment and Lisa, I can't remember her Lisa Harper, will be representing Indian country. Both tremendous advocates, and yet they'll be going toe-to-toe with some of the top personalities around the country that have the same vested interest in not necessarily tribal inclusion, but state, local, federal dynamics around assessments. It'll be important that you monitor those negotiated rulemaking activities and all of the subsequent ones that come after that. I'll highlight a few of them that are important to you. One will likely come out in non-binding regulatory guidance, but yet will have to be consulted on because of the responsibilities of the department. In Title VIII, certain local education agencies or school districts are now compelled to give the opportunity of consultation to tribes. How many of you are aware of that? Raise your hand, please. Not too many. Let me tell you this. At the LEA level, in terms of your school-wide plan, if you had to consult with the tribes in your school district, what would you do? Some of you are serving 10, 15 tribes. That's going to be the new reality in ESSA. What does that structure look like? Both at the local education agency level for school-wide plans, but also at the SEA level. And so this will be a conversation that you would want to monitor closely, because it's an opportunity as much as it's a burden of responsibility for tribal leaders to begin engaging effectively with local education agencies. Through their departments of education or tribal education agencies, this is what Indian country has been asking for. An acknowledgement of tribal governments, particularly in schools that serve American Indian and Alaska Native students, or on jurisdictions of American Indians and Alaska Native students. Not perfect by any means. Some of you will be missed. Some school districts will be missed. In fact, many will. But this is the new foundation of which we began to work our way out of BIE in the sense of what we know we need to have done for our Native youth, what our school systems need to look like. No longer having the blue sky conversations or the gray sky conversations that say we're being kept from this level of authority. And some of you have been doing this work all along. I won't for a second want to overstep that or not acknowledge that. Two other pieces to this center on the need from Indian country to hear what we are doing in response to suicides. A very specific timeline for that report to be not only achieved, but also what period it covers. About a year back from the time it was reauthorized, and they give us a little over a year and a half to complete this report. So that work is underway now. Much of it centered on what is happening in one of the promise zones, just like the promise zone here in Oklahoma, in Pine Ridge, where we're taking an interagency coordinated effort, not just education, but all matters of economic development, all matters of planning, strategic planning, and the ancillary issues that relate to those challenges, as a model for how we need to more effectively begin engaging with tribal communities across the country. Two other pieces that are linked together. One is a standalone grant for Native languages out of Title VII, Special Programs for Indian Children. This grant, largely held by the champions, is the grant to ensure that there was more resources for immersion activities. Will not only support such activities but also dual language, knowing that the reality, my right to your left, is striving for culturally responsive education. Remember, we're talking about thresholds here, working our way to dual language, multilingual strategies, to immersion. We know that there are tribal leaders and there are educators that say we can, or at least there's challenges, significant challenges to doing immersion right out the gate. So we're taking a responsible role of trying to take existing resources and map them along that continuum. So this grant structure, although it will face an uphill battle on resourcing again, will have accessibility to those two pieces. And arguably, Title VII, Johnson O'Malley, is our foundation on culturally responsive side of this work. And lastly, we can't forget those projects that are ready now. Some of the sophistication that you see here in Oklahoma. Really happy to see much of our folks from around the country be here to get to sit shoulder to shoulder with some of my colleagues here from Oklahoma. In the sense that we share practices, there's some great work happening in this area of the country. And I really hope you can share some of your experiences with them as much as learn from them as well. And in an upcoming funding opportunity that speaks to the need for you all to be not only sharing practices, but to be thinking about how do you converge the challenges of tribes working with school districts and institutions of higher education. We have just recently, and I know that's on the back of many of your mind, let $17.4 million out in the Native Youth Community Projects. And this is a 90-day timeline as of February 29th. April 29th is the intent to apply, and then sometime in May, if we're getting the due date in May, someone else may know that, but in May is the closing date, the last minute to transmit that application. And these grants are what we heard about in consultation. One, these need to reach tribal communities. These can't be the same actors that sub-grant us to death and we never see any result of those inputs, much less the outcomes. It needs to be a place-based initiative that has Indian country in mind, but doesn't step away from our urban Native youth and communities as well. The resources, as tribal leaders and educators said, they need to be flexible. But we care about outcomes. But you can't set it up on the what works clearinghouse standards. Indian country is not ready for that. But we value evidence-based. And it needs to be focused on our future generations. Our youth